Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I was rinsing out a coffee mug when I realized I couldn't remember the last sound she'd made that wasn't a sigh. My name is Mark Adler, 37, a network engineer in Pittsburgh. I was standing at the sink in our one-bedroom, looking out at a narrow stripe of late light on the brick across the alley, when it hit me that the apartment had gone quiet in a way that wasn't rest. 3 weeks earlier, she stopped talking. No fight. Just a switch flip I didn't see coming, and then a silence that filled the place like fog. At first, I treated it like weather. People have moods. Storms pass. I kept the basics moving. I made dinner and set 2 plates. Hers went cold on the counter more than once. When she did eat, it was standing at the island, scrolling, thumb hovering like she had somewhere more important to be. I tried bridges that didn't demand anything. A sticky note on the fridge that said, "Walk after work?" A link to a playlist we used to put on Sunday mornings, a printout of a trail map for a park she'd said she wanted to see. The note wound up face down. The playlist showed as skipped. The trail map migrated to the recycling bin without a crease. Our routines loosened like old nails. We used to meet on the couch after dinner and trade small talk about our days. Now I sat on the balcony with my plate and watched the city breathe while she drifted room to room as if the floor plan had rearranged itself and I hadn't gotten the memo. The bed turned into 2 distant countries with a demilitarized zone of sheets between them. I bought new pillows and said nothing about how hers stayed stacked like barricades. I kept my voice even and asked once, gently, what was going on. She walked past me to the bathroom and closed the door like steam leaving a room. Little things started adding up. Her phone never touched a surface anymore. It lived in her hand, face down, or in a pocket like a bodyguard on duty. Passwords changed on the streaming accounts. The shared grocery list app showed my edits in gray and hers in red, and then just mine. Coffee disappeared. The day I went to pour some, the canister was gone, and I stood there with an empty scoop in my hand, laughing once at the absurdity of how it felt. I switched to black tea like a man adapting to a small climate change. The next day, a new bag of coffee appeared, sealed, sitting on the highest shelf, out of my reach unless I got a chair. Message received. Week 2 looked like a policy change. She started sending calendar invites from across the room. Noise machine delivery window 2 to 4. Dentist. Dinner with Maya? Every invitation arrived without notes, just blocks of time that walled themselves off on my phone. It felt like we were coworkers sharing a printer, careful professionals who didn't speak unless something jammed. In the closet, her side thinned out. I found a garment rack assembled in the guest room, dresses and blouses arranged by color distance, a museum of outfits I didn't see her wear. She began closing doors with a pressure that wasn't a slam, but sounded like a verdict. The microwave beeped became punctuation for sentences neither of us finished. I didn't pry. I'm in the business of connections, but not the kind that come from checking someone's messages. I watched. I listened. Silence isn't empty. It has texture and weight. Hers said, "Pay attention to me without me meeting you halfway." Mine said, "I hear you, I won't shout." I kept life functional. I ran the dishwasher, took out the trash, folded laundry without commentary. The towel I set on her side of the rack stayed and used. She'd started taking showers late, after I was in bed, steam drifting under the door like an alibi. There were small, almost laughable tests. I'd walk to the door when I heard her keys. She'd pause on the other side like she needed a beat before stepping into the space we shared. I'd ask if she wanted anything from the store. She'd pretend not to hear until the door closed behind me, and then text almond milk, like I was a courier. I tried to keep score out of it. Once you start adding points, you've already decided to play a game. Still, the numbers were there, unignorable as the hum of the refrigerator at 2 a.m. Quiet signs of self-respect crept into the edges of my day. I changed my emergency contact at the doctor's office to my brother, because some calls shouldn't go unanswered. I scanned our lease into a folder labeled Home, just to know what it actually said. I turned off a couple of subscriptions in my name that she used and never mentioned. I didn't do it to provoke anything, just aligning cost with use. One night, after she brushed past me without looking up, I slid my passport into the inner pocket of my work bag and tucked a spare credit card behind it. The 3rd week, the apartment felt like a library where I didn't know the rules. She started coming home later and later, not late enough to cause a conversation, just late enough to say she could. I sat at the table with a notebook and wrote down practical things to remember: autopays, deadlines, what day the laundry room was least busy, because anxiety likes a to-do list, and I wasn't going to give it more than that. She ate a bowl of cereal at 9:30, standing at the sink, staring at the middle distance. I rinsed my mug and moved out of her way without trying to decipher anything. One night I asked, plain and calm, if there was someone else. No accusation or edge. She turned the faucet on full and let it run, then shut it off and left the room. The drip ticked into the stainless steel like a metronome. That was the closest thing to an answer I got. I couldn't decide what was worse: contempt I could see, or disinterest so complete it didn't bother forming into language. I noticed how many of my sentences had become offers. Want to go for a walk? Want to watch something? Want me to pick up dinner from that place you like? Offers are doors. She left them closed. The apartment reminded me of a network with one device refusing to handshake. The packets keep leaving, timing out, returning with errors until you stop sending them because the log is full. That analogy would have made her smile once. Now it felt like a private joke. I told myself to stay sane. Saturday morning, I cleaned out the hall closet. I told myself it was spring cleaning, even though the calendar disagreed. I found a shoebox with ticket stubs and forgot receipts, the detritus of older, easy days. I kept one ticket. The afternoon we took off work to see a matinee on a whim, and put the rest back. On the shelf above the coats, I slid a slim folder with copies of documents: birth certificate, car title, insurance. It felt overcautious and entirely reasonable at the same time. By the second week, the quiet stopped feeling like weather and started acting like policy. She didn't speak, she issued notices. Calendar invites landed on my phone from 10 feet away. Dinner with Maya. Yoga late. Noise machine delivery. No context, no notes, just boxes of time partitioned like cubicles. If I said, "Got it," she tapped her screen and turned her shoulder the way people do in elevators when they don't want to make eye contact. In the closet, hangers thinned on her side until I found a new rack in the guest room. Dresses arranged by color, shoes lined heel to wall. A museum exhibit of a life I apparently didn't have tickets to. The laundry basket omitted anything of hers, and the grocery app told the same story. My additions, eggs, beans, my coffee, appeared gray and then disappeared entirely. One evening I asked if she needed anything while I was heading out. She kept stirring her tea, like I'd spoken on a frequency she didn't support. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Almond milk. Courier requests from a person within arm's reach. I kept the temperature down. What's going on? Once. Neutral. She brushed past me to the bathroom and set the lock. A day later, I tried the question everyone drafts and rarely sends. Is there someone else? No accusation in it. If anything, it was an offer to name what we were pretending not to notice. She ran the faucet for 30 seconds and left the room. Water has a way of making you feel unreasonable for expecting language. Her silence widened into what looked like competence. She scheduled dentist appointments and package pickups without a word, left 3 sticky notes on the fridge meant for her, but placed where I'd see them: spin class 6:30, Maya B-Day, oil change. A performance of responsible adulthood that somehow erased me from it. Meanwhile, small provocations multiplied. She started coming home later. Never late, just later. If I was on the couch when her key hit the lock, she waited a beat in the hall as if calibrating to a new atmosphere. When she entered, she'd do a slow scan for packages, mail, anything that didn't involve greeting the person who'd unlocked the door for 3 years straight. I adjusted. I canceled 2 subscriptions in my name that she used more than I did and didn't announce it. I moved my emergency contact from spouse to brother at the clinic. Some calls shouldn't fall into a voicemail abyss. I scanned the lease and noted the clauses people don't read until they need to. I started taking lunch in the park and used those 20 minutes to book 3 apartment tours. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity converted into reservations. Quiet strength looks boring from the outside. When she did initiate, it was with accusations that assumed facts not in evidence. "You're different," she said to her phone while texting someone else. "Colder." I asked what she meant. She scrolled, shrugged, and let the accusation hang like a coat no one planned to wear. Another night, she wandered into the kitchen at 9:45, opened the freezer, stared into it like a portal, and said, "You never planned anything anymore." I had planned things: walks, a movie, a dinner that sat warm for an hour. But planning without participation is just logistics. Our friends felt the draft. Maya texted to confirm Saturday. I replied yes. She replied separately, we might be late. We were more than late. We were no-shows. At 8:15, I sent a quick apology from the sidewalk, then went home and washed dishes that weren't dirty. Later, a mutual friend messaged, everything okay there? I typed, we're working through some quiet, and left it at that. I wasn't building a coalition. I was documenting the temperature. By week 3, even the apartment seemed to learn her rhythm. Doors closed with a pressure that wasn't quite a slam. Drawers made their own arguments. She started sleeping at the far edge of the mattress, pillows stacked like barriers, alarms set early, and then snoozed in 5-minute intervals that cut the morning into ribbons. In the mirror, I caught a version of myself that looked like a careful man in a loud room, conserving words until they could do work. Silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was control. Mine, not hers. The tests escalated from petty to precise. She left a bill with my name highlighted but the balance at 0, as if to suggest I was missing something. She forgot to replace the key fob on the hook and texted me at work to ask where it was, even though it was in her tote. When I replied, on the hook, she sent back a photo from the hallway and a thumbs down. She accepted a calendar invite I'd placed for us. Walk at 7. Then at 6:55 put on running shoes and jogged out alone. I watched her reflection pass in the dark window and felt a sharp, clean line form inside me. I stopped over-explaining my own movements. If I went to the gym, I went. If I had a late meeting, I didn't narrate it. I set my phone to do not disturb after 11 and slept through the seconds of her restless scrolling. When I did speak, the words were simple, declarative. I'll be home around 8. There's leftover pasta. Rent is due Friday. She responded with non-words, shrugs, sighs, a single K that made the air colder than any winter outside our windows. One evening, she sat across from me at the table and tried to bait a fight by asking if I'd considered therapy for me. The implication was tidy. Something's wrong with you. Fix it without me. I said I'd consider counseling if she wanted to participate. She blinked once, as if I'd misunderstood the assignment, then stood and carried her plate to the sink like the meeting had run long. The next day, she left an open browser tab with a couples therapist directory on it. But when I asked if she wanted me to schedule something, she said, I'm too busy. That was the point. Therapy is prop, not practice. On Thursday, her mother called while I was chopping onions. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to a message that sounded kind but had the shape of a warning. She says you're distant. Marriage is work. I saved it and finished making dinner for one. I wasn't going to recruit her family into something that didn't need more witnesses. There were moments I could have been petty, moments any normal man would have raised his voice. The night she changed the Netflix profile names, hers to owner, mine to guest, I laughed, turned off the TV, and read a paperback until midnight. The next morning, I put the book in my bag and went to work early, enjoying how the office hum sounded like normal life. In the afternoon, I toured an apartment with tall windows and a view of a street that had nothing to do with us. I didn't sign anything. I stood in the doorway, felt my breathing slow, and used that as a data point. Sometimes you don't need advice. You need a room that tells the truth. By Friday, the pattern was complete enough to memorize. The escalation wasn't noise. It was a scoreboard she kept resetting to 0, so I'd keep playing. I didn't. I kept my voice level, my steps measured, my calendar my own. When she came in that night and stood in the entry staring at me like a bouncer deciding who gets in, I looked up from the sink and asked one last time, calm, almost friendly, what changed for you? She opened her mouth, closed it, and reached for her phone. The screen lit her face. The room stayed dark. I turned off the faucet and let the last drops find the drain on their own. I woke before the alarm and lay there long enough to name what I felt. Not anger. The kind that doesn't negotiate. I watched the ceiling turn from gray to a lighter gray and understood the simplest truth I'd been circling for weeks. Staying was an argument. Leaving was a decision. Decisions are my job. I make them all day between routers and firewalls and systems that either handshake or don't. At 5:42 a.m., I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and started doing what I do best, quiet logistics. The move had been pre-staged. 2 afternoons ago, I'd signed a lease on a third-floor walk-up on the other side of town. Nothing dramatic, just tall windows and light on hardwood and a kitchen that accepted a kettle without complaint. Yesterday, I'd set up a P.O. box and forwarded the mail, updated HR and my payroll address, added the new place to my renter's policy, and scheduled utilities for a noon start. I was relocating my life to where it could breathe. I showered, dressed in clothes that didn't announce anything, and sent a message through the tenant portal. Formal notice to vacate by month's end, effective immediately for possession. It took 30 seconds and closed a loop I didn't want to leave open. She'd chosen silence. I respected her choice by mirroring it. Words had stopped meaning anything in that apartment. Paperwork still did. At 6:05, I walked to the corner, signed for a small moving van, and drove it back while the streetlights blinked toward daylight. The building was quiet except for a neighbor's radio 2 floors up and the elevator cables humming in their shaft. I parked, grabbed the hand truck, and went to work. I packed only what I owned outright and what mattered. Clothes, work gear, the toolkit my dad gave me, each wrench in its slot. Favorite books, curated, not sentimental. The coffee grinder and kettle, small rituals of a man who starts his own engines. The framed photo of my father waist deep in a cold October river, laughing at something I said and pretending not to be proud of me. I left what wasn't mine and what had become ours for her. The couch, the dishes we picked together, the framed prints she loved. I filled bankers' boxes, taped them clean, labeled them with a Sharpie and block letters. The apartment felt like a hotel room after checkout. Tidy, impersonal, the story already moved somewhere else. Between trips, I wiped the counters and swept the hallway. It sounds excessive because it was deliberate. I wanted to intersect with as little chaos as possible. I unplugged the ISP gateway, boxed it, and set a reminder to drop it at the storefront on my way across town. The router I'd bought with my own money went in my bag. No drama, just property. I pulled 2 trash bags from the roll and filled them with the in-between things that accumulate when people stop talking. Duplicate chargers, cracked hangers, expired coupons, the plastic trays that come with appliances and never find a purpose. Gone. In the bedroom, I opened my top drawer and found the ring in its dish. I hadn't worn it in a week. It felt dishonest to carry it around while we were pretending not to notice gravity. I set it on the dresser where sunlight would find it by noon. The keys went on the hook by the door, their usual place, out of habit and courtesy. She could come home and lock up behind the story she wanted to keep telling. There was one last look around, but not the cinematic kind. I checked the oven, the windows, the circuit breakers. I took photos of the rooms for my records because small disputes like to become big ones when people feel embarrassed. The place looked finished. The refrigerator hummed like always. The plants she'd stopped watering were still alive because I'd kept watering them, and I did it once more out of respect for the living, not the arrangement. I carried the final box to the van at 6:58, strapped things in with 2 ratchet ties, and closed the bay. A neighbor shuffled by in slippers and nodded at me like men do when they recognize a decision. I nodded back. No confession was required. Back upstairs, I took one last pass with a microfiber cloth over the table where we used to eat. I had to lean across the chair she'd favored to catch a corner I'd missed. My mind didn't flood with scenes, it emptied. That was the confirmation I needed. Before I left, I did one more administrative thing. Transferred the autopay for the apartment to manual and scheduled a final on-time payment while the lease ran its course. Not a penny late. I moved my parking pass from my windshield to the blank envelope that held my new keys and labeled the envelope with my own handwriting. I sent myself an email with the subject line "Done, Home," and nothing in the body. Inbox 0 for a chapter. At 7:10 a.m., I put my hand on the door, exhaled once, and closed it softly behind me. The lock clicked. No slam. In the stairwell, I heard my footsteps and nothing else. I didn't look back through the peephole. There was nothing behind it I hadn't seen already. Driving across the river felt like toggling a switch back to factory settings. Morning sun found the windshield and threw a bar of light across the dashboard. Traffic was thin. The city had the good grace to give me green lights. I dropped the ISP hardware, signed the return, kept the receipt, and didn't seek eye contact with the clerk who couldn't care less about any of this. At the new building, the manager handed me a pack of elevator pads and congratulated me on being ahead of schedule. I smiled because being ahead of schedule was the whole point. The new apartment accepted my boxes without comment. I staged them along one wall, set the toolbox on the counter, and assembled the bed frame with the kind of attention you give a ceremony you never expected to officiate. I boiled water in the kettle and drank coffee standing at the window, learning the shapes of rooftops I didn't know an explanation to. Then I did 3 small things that made the move irreversible. I put my toothbrush in the holder. I put the photo of my dad on the bookshelf. I pulled my work laptop from its sleeve and connected to the network. Internet up. Identity reset. Around 9, my phone lit with a number I recognized but wasn't required to answer. I watched it vibrate twice and go quiet on the counter. I had meetings to prep and a desk to assemble and a door that was mine to lock. The day moved forward without the weight of an argument. In the space where noise had been, there was the click of screws seating into fresh wood, the small victorious sound of something fitting exactly as designed. Before lunch, I sent a short message to the property office, keys where they could find them, forwarding address on file, documentation attached. No adjectives or narrative. I texted my brother the new address and a simple line. All set. He replied with a check mark and a time he could swing by this weekend with a spare set of hands and a pizza. Normal life. Unspectacular and therefore perfect. There was no dramatic speech delivered to an empty room. Just a man in a quiet place adjusting a chair and opening a notebook to a clean page. The important part wasn't that I left. It was how. Intact, measured, accountable to myself. She could keep the silence she'd curated like a gallery piece. I had chosen a different exhibit. Light, air, a table set for one with no apology required. The new place taught me what quiet was supposed to sound like. Not the weaponized version I'd been living in, but the kind with a kettle whistle, street noise at the edge, and the small click a key makes when you own the lock. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and answered work messages as if nothing huge had shifted, because the truth was nothing dramatic had, just a correction back to reality. Around 10, my phone lit up with her name. I watched it vibrate twice on the counter and let it pass into voicemail. A second call followed from a number I didn't recognize. Then a text. We need to talk. I set the phone face down and tightened the last screw on my new desk. For weeks, I'd been told my presence didn't rate a sentence. It wasn't my job to audition now that the audience had arrived. By noon, I had 3 voicemails. I listened to them in order, not for information, but to mark the stages. The first was brisk, managerial. This isn't okay. You can't just vanish. The second softened into grievance. Leaving like that is abandonment. The third landed somewhere new. A practiced concern that sounded like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. Have you eaten? Each one tried to tug a different thread. Compliance, guilt, nurture. Minutes later, an email from the property office arrived. A polite acknowledgement of my notice, a reminder about move-out procedures, and one extra line. Your spouse visited the office and asked if you were at home, the manager wrote. Per policy, we did not share details, but when she asked whether you still lived there, the staff member on duty replied, he moved out this morning. I read the sentence once and pictured her face receiving it. A clean, factual wall placed where she had expected another soft door. Facts have a way of reducing theatrics. The calls intensified into a loop. She shifted strategies mid-voicemail, blame to bargaining, then to wistful reminiscence. Old photos came through. The beach trip, the matinee ticket stub I'd found in a shoebox, the selfie we took in a restaurant bathroom when the mirror lighting was perfect. She attached a song link from a road trip in our first year, as if nostalgia could serve as an access code. I heard the chorus in my head and remembered how the album ends, quiet, definitive. I set the phone aside and went back to work tickets, the kind that resolve when you give them the right attention at the right time. Mutual friends started pinging. One texted, she says you left without a word. Is that true? I typed. I left after 3 weeks of no words. I gave notice to the office. Another wrote, you two okay? I replied, we're handling logistics. I didn't build a case or circulate a thread. The people who mattered either already knew the temperature or would soon feel it. Late afternoon, a longer voicemail arrived. The tone had lost its shape. She cycled through 3 versions of me in 90 seconds, controlling, cold, then suddenly the only person who knows me. She asked where I was, then demanded the key, then said she'd cook if I came home. It wasn't the offer it wanted to be. Cooking can be care. It can also be a signal flare. I let it dim on its own. That evening I walked past the old block intentionally, not to provoke anything, but to test my own pulse. The building looked the same. Planet of potted plants on windowsills, the familiar elevator groan. I kept moving. The river air was sharp in a way my lungs liked. On the way back, I picked up a lamp for the living room. A man in front of me on the sidewalk carried a pizza, balancing the box with one hand and a six-pack with the other. Normal life everywhere, unbothered by our private drama. That perspective helped. Paperwork kept doing the work people avoid. The property office sent a follow-up confirming the timeline to remove my name at month's end, guidelines about final inspection, a note about the deposit. None of it cared about feelings, accusations, or playlists. I answered promptly, attached the photos I'd taken of the empty rooms. Behind that email came another from HR confirming the address change and benefit updates. Each confirmation pulled a thread that had tied me to a place where silence was the main product. Her outreach widened. Messages appeared on social accounts I rarely check. A mutual friend forwarded a group chat screenshot I didn't ask for. In it, she was telling a story about betrayal and sudden departures. Someone finally replied, "But you stopped speaking to him for weeks." The screenshot ended there. You can't control what people say about you, but you can stop contributing free material. That night, I sat at the new table and ate with both elbows on the wood like a teenager. The room was empty in a way that didn't ache. I put the dad-in waiter's photo on a shelf and straightened it by a millimeter. The phone lit again with her name. I let it ring out. The voicemail that followed began with quiet tears and ended with the sound of a door closing somewhere on her end. I recognized that sound. It had been my soundtrack for a month. In the morning, a practical text arrived. "What about the couch?" I answered, "It stays. It's in good shape." Another, "Rent." I replied, "Paid through end of month. Office has notice." She sent, "We should meet," without a question mark. I wrote, "Email is best for logistics." We were back to the only conversation worth having. Who was responsible for what, by when? The part where we loved each other had already been edited out of the script, not by me, but by the silence she'd preferred to speaking. I wasn't going to improvise lines onto a stage she had vacated weeks ago. Midweek, the landlord called to confirm access for maintenance and to thank me for leaving the unit in order. She seemed surprised. He added, "Careful, professional." I said I appreciated the update and hung up. Surprise is what happens when you mistake someone's calm for permanence. Her final maneuver was a collage of good memories, screenshots from vacations, a photo of the plant I'd kept alive, a text that read, "We were good." I looked at the plant on my windowsill and the lights spilling over it and realized that past tense was the only part we agreed on. I didn't reply, because anything I wrote would have served the wrong story. By the weekend, the noise ebbed. A friend sent a brief message. No advice, just the word solid. I built a bookshelf, mismeasured once, corrected, and took a picture not to post, but to remember the moment a small thing fit. The ordinary friction of assembling a life felt more honest than any speech I could have given. I slept well. No doors closed like statements. Just morning arriving at the window and a kettle starting to sing. The last email from the office arrived Monday. My name scheduled off the lease at month's end. Deposit status to follow. Keys received. I filed it in a folder called Home and made a new rule for myself about how to live. Don't argue where paperwork will do. Don't perform where decisions will suffice. Don't chase what prefers your absence. She had tested how long silence could hold a house together. This week answered, "It can't." The first Saturday in the new place, I woke up to light on the ceiling and the sound of a bus braking 2 blocks over. Ordinary noises. No coded messages. I made coffee and stood barefoot at the window until the mug cooled in my hand. The absence of drama didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. When a life fits, you stop narrating and start doing. I opened my laptop and made a list that looked boring on purpose. Register the mailbox, oil change, set up auto pay for utilities, call a lawyer for a consult. The lawyer was the kind of man who keeps tissues on the table and rarely needs them. He listened, asked the 3 questions that matter: timeline, assets, intent, and laid out options on a yellow pad. He respected that I wanted clean lines, not a bonfire. We talked about separation agreements, documented dates, a plan for dividing the small things without creating big problems. He said, "Keep everything in writing." I said that was already the rule. I didn't announce any of this. I emailed her a simple note, logistics only. asking for 3 windows to retrieve anything of mine I might have missed, and offering equivalent windows if she wanted something from storage. No adjectives. She replied with a paragraph about history and potential and the way we used to be on Sunday mornings. At the end she wrote, "Can we just talk?" I answered the only part that required an answer. "Please propose times in writing. Bring a list of items. We'll coordinate with the office for access." Negotiations are clearest when you decline invitations to arenas you no longer play in. Her next message swung between warmth and scolding and landed on an offer to cook, to talk, to reset. I remembered the month of closed doors and calendar invites sent from 10 feet away. Reset from what? There are moments when you realize the behavior you tolerated has already eaten the apology it came with. I wrote back, "Email is best." No commentary. Just the boundary doing its job without raising its voice. The day she came for her boxes, I wasn't there. We had agreed by email on a 2-hour window with the office. I left her ring in a small envelope with her name on it, placed on the empty dresser she favored, the sunlight square reaching toward it like a clock. The manager later told me she asked 3 times whether I might come by. He repeated the schedule we'd agreed on and wished her a good day. Paperwork keeps people honest when emotions try not to be. Friends adjusted. The ones who wanted a show drifted away. The ones who cared about both of us asked the kind of questions that don't require taking sides. One sent a message that said simply, "Proud of how you handled it." Another admitted she'd assumed I would blow up or cave, and that watching me do neither made her rethink how people end things. I said thanks, offered to meet for coffee, and then actually showed up. Reality creates its own gravity. You don't have to explain it. My days got heavier in the good way. Work, gym, groceries, a clean kitchen by 9. I put a small plant on the windowsill and watched it turn toward the sun like it knew what it wanted. I woke up before the alarm and didn't dread any hour of the day. A week later, I took a detour past our old brunch place and didn't go in. Nothing inside that building could tell me something I hadn't already learned. Her attempts slowed and sharpened. A late-night text said, "I miss you." Another said, "We could fix this." And then, "Please." I read them in the morning and didn't answer because answering would start a conversation we had already finished in silence weeks before. Not responding is different from punishing. It's trusting your own conclusion. I kept my rule, logistics in writing, feelings on my side of the street. The agreement came together faster than I expected. We divided furniture without argument. I kept what I'd bought and what I used. She kept what she loved and what she'd chosen. No haggling over plates. We signed in separate rooms. When the last PDF landed in my inbox with 2 signatures and a timestamp, I closed my laptop and sat back until my shoulders dropped. I started saying yes to invitations I used to wave off. Trivia night with coworkers. A pickup game one neighborhood over. A museum on a random Thursday because the new exhibit was open late and I didn't need to coordinate with anyone's calendar but my own. I learned the names of the baristas downstairs and the best time to run laundry without fighting for machines. None of it made a headline. That was exactly the point. A small twist came 2 weeks later when a friend of hers, one who'd always been polite and distant, sent a short message. I told her to talk sooner. Then a second. She didn't listen. I typed, "I hope she's okay," and left it there. It wasn't my job to turn regret into a reunion. People earn returns with changed behavior, not with a chorus of sorry sung over the same notes. One afternoon, I walked the long way home and past the river where the wind runs faster. I thought about how hard I'd tried to keep peace by absorbing it, how long I'd believed patience would translate into respect if I just held still. That was the wrong equation. Respect isn't the interest you collect for waiting. It's the principle you risk by staying where you're devalued. The last message from her arrived on a Sunday. "Can we talk now?" For words, present tense, too late. I set the phone down and finished making dinner. My answer was already in the structure of my days. Meetings attended, bills paid, a bed I sleep in without bracing for sound. Some decisions you speak, others you live. Weeks later, I walked past the old block again and felt nothing complicated. The same elevator groaned. The same window plants leaned toward the same patch of sun. I headed home, unlocked my door, and set my keys in a bowl. The apartment exhaled like it was glad I was back. I didn't lose anything. I chose myself, and the rest sorted itself around that fact. If there's a lesson I can say out loud without flinching, it's this. You cannot negotiate for respect inside a conversation that denies you a voice. You don't restore intimacy by performing endurance. You don't become a better man by making yourself smaller. You leave quietly, build carefully, and protect the peace you had to purchase with your absence. That peace becomes your standard. Anyone who wants a place in it learns the price up front.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.